Well, I've got this crappy old monitor that's about to fall to pieces hooked up to it now. It's just an all flat screen HDMI monitor. As you can see, it's got some funny bars on it and all over the place, but it works for our purposes here. Now, I ended up having to use a composite to HDMI converter, and the video quality is about like you'd expect out of a television set. You can see there's a good bit of color bleed there from the NTSC artifacts, but a lot of Apple II software, especially some of the earlier stuff, actually uses those NTSC artifacts to blend colors, so maybe it's not such a bad thing. Now, this game here is running in double high-res mode, which only works if you've got 128K. So 16 colors on screen at the same time instead of 4, which is cool, I guess. Also, you may have noticed that you didn't hear any floppy drive noises. Well, the floppy drive's still there, but I'm also trying out this contraption here. This is a floppy drive emulator. I think the guy that makes these originally made them for old Macintoshes, but they work on the Apple II disk controllers as well. So that's kind of cool. Although, let me hit Control Open Apple Reset here and reboot the thing, and you'll notice the distinct lack of disk drive noises, which I actually find not so good. It seems like one doesn't really watch the light on the disk drive or the in-use light on this contraption, but rather listens to it. So, I don't know, one of these days I may try to make my own floppy drive emulator, and if I do, I will stick a speaker on it and make it emulate floppy drive noises too, just so that you can tell when it's in use. It's really very... It's almost creepy, you know what I'm saying, to not be able to hear the floppy drive running. I'm not complaining. I mean, it's a great contraption. I mean, you can fit the entire, like, Asimov Apple II archive on an SD card and stick into this thing and have, like, all of the Apple II software that was ever made in a box this size, which is pretty cool. Anyway, that's the deal with that. Now, I've got some other garbage here that I've been fooling with. This isn't finished yet. I don't know if there's enough light in here to see, but this is an Apple II proto board with a piece of perf board stuck to it, and what you see over here is a teensy microcontroller. Over here is a 6551 ASIA, that's like a UART for the 6502, and an inverter chip there. This is kind of like a Apple Super Serial card without a ROM on it. This isn't my idea. I found the schematic somewhere else. I was originally going to try to do this parallel with an actual bus interface on the card. But it turns out that you can run these chips at 115 kilobaud, which seems kind of slow nowadays, but is quite fast for a machine such as this. So the deal is, what I'll do is I'll finish this. I still need to solder some jumper wires into the card edge connector here and stick them into the right places, and I'll also be putting a pin. Well, I'll actually be soldering this old 40-pin cable into it, at least a few of the wires. And then the other end of this cable plugs into a Raspberry Pi single-board computer, into this GPIO header up here. And it's got a built-in serial port, so the Raspberry Pi and the Apple II via this serial interface chip will be able to communicate with each other serially, granted at TTL levels. There isn't any use to convert to positive and negative 12 volts and then back to 0 and 5 volts. That will allow me to kind of use that as an accelerator in the Apple II. Although in its... I'll put a link down in the video description. I stole all these ideas from another guy that actually came up with this the first time. The solution that I'm going to try first on the perf board is as it is on the schematic, and it kind of makes the Apple II act as a glorified peripheral for the Raspberry Pi. I mean, you use your keyboard, it doesn't use the video interface, you use the keyboard, it gives you access to the disk drives, stuff like that, and then they run an emulator on the Pi for like a 2GS or whatever you want. You can run Linux on them too. Well, actually, the emulator runs under Linux, so it runs Linux all the time. Anyway, I digress. But I kind of want to go a little further than that and actually have the Raspberry Pi controlled by the Apple II. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to do some magic with a microcontroller here. First of all, I'm going to try to remove the keyboard encoder from the Apple II, hook that microcontroller up to the keyboard encoder socket and the key matrix for the keyboard here, and make it scan the Apple II keyboard and then output USB keyboard signals over the USB port, as well as emulating the Apple II keyboard controller, at least insofar as putting, the 8 bits of keyboard data on the bus and handling the keyboard strobe and all of that. And what that'll allow me to do is send actual, scan codes to Linux. Because the Apple II keyboard encoder chip in the Apple II, it only can handle one key at a time, and it doesn't send key up and key down events like a PC or nowadays even a Macintosh keyboard do. It just puts an ASCII data in parallel onto the bus at a certain memory location when you hit a key, and then sets a strobe line, or sends an IRQ, and then you strobe the keyboard to reset it. Something like that. I can't remember the exact details without looking at the manual. So anyway, so that'll make that work a little bit better. And I also want to control the power to the Raspberry Pi using the Apple II with a solid state relay or something like that, so that it controls when the accelerator activates, and kind of has the Apple II acting as the master rather than just a glorified peripheral for the ARM CPU. Maybe that's too ambitious. I don't know. The guy that came up with this idea to begin with actually manufactures a board that does this, but they're all out of stock, and I don't know when they'll be back again, and it's really only 2 chips, so I figured I'd just build my own. I'm going to do this first with the Raspberry Pi. This is the Raspberry Pi 3B+. It's got 1 gig of RAM on it, which I guess is plenty for fiddling around, but if I can get that to work, then I've also got this Rock 64 board, which is kind of like a Raspberry on steroids. It's got 4 gigs of RAM. It runs off of an eMMC card instead of SD, and it's all in all a beefier machine. Fast enough, in my opinion, to be a general-purpose computer. Like for software development. That thing will run Eclipse and all of the stuff that I would ever want to run on it, I guess. So if I can get it working with the Pi, which has better software support, then I'll try getting it working with the Rock 64. My biggest worry with the Rock 64 is the video chipset isn't as well supported as it could be right now. So I'm not sure what that'll mean. I haven't tried either of them yet. They just got here recently. So, also with the microcontroller, I also want to switch video outputs with it. Now, I'm using this HDMI, composite to HDMI converter for now, even though the video quality is pretty poor, because there's a guy that's getting ready to manufacture an HDMI video card for the Apple II, and once I get one of those, I think that I can take one of those HDMI AB switches and use a couple of transistors or something. I'll have to see how it's put together when I get it, to make the microcontroller select between the A and B video sources with that little cheapo converter, and then I can plug the Apple II's the video card, and the Rock 64 or the Raspberry Pi, whichever one ends up being used, into that AB switch, and then the Apple II will be able to switch the video output itself too, so there won't be any of that, like switching the monitor input source to go between composite video and HDMI or anything like that. It'll just, the accelerator will be more fully integrated into the Apple II, I think, if it works. I haven't really done anything like this since I was in college, and I don't remember what I'm doing, but it'll be interesting, and hopefully I won't blow up any expensive single-board computers. Well, the Rock 64 is like $65. The Raspberry Pi is really cheap, though. Hopefully next time we'll do some Raspberry Pi action, see how that goes. But yeah, the first implementation of this Apple II Pi, as they call it, will be by the book, according to the schematic, using the software that the guy's written for it, and then I will gradually turn it into my contraption, if it works. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, alright, cool. See you later.